Let's play Have You Ever?
That sounds ominous.
Okay, how about you, teacher? Have you ever smoked?
Yeah, I was back today for about 5 years there, and then I quit probably about probably almost 10 years ago.
Congrats!
Yeah.
On the quitting part, at least.
Yeah. All right. Back to the book.
The Demon.
Yes.
All books are demons. They're nightmares. They haunt me in my dreams. I had one nightmare where a book actually chased me off of a ledge, and then it flew and caught me. Great movie, though.
I just have an irrational fear of rutabagas. All right. VPN remote access. Small businesses sometimes will have salespeople out in the field. And there are two different types of VPNs. There's gateway to gateway, or client to. Or you'll also hear this called site to site. Site to site is good if you have like a remote office or a stationary location that doesn't change. The client to gateway would be, for example, if you've got a roaming salesperson that has their laptop and you want to make sure that they can access, for example, an application. When you buy routers, you can buy some, nowadays especially, it didn't always used to be, that already have the VPN connectivity and software built into them. But they will tell you how many endpoints. That's something that you always need to worry about. Is endpoints. Because it doesn't do you any good if you buy that VPN router and it only has 2 endpoints, but you have 5 people in the field. So, or you currently have 5 people, but maybe in a year they're going to hire 2 more. So, capacity and growth. A lot of people don't like to. They got the idea of just-in-time delivery. Basically, that they can upgrade at any point. It's not always the case, especially when you're starting to deal with routers and firmware. Some of them are licensed, but most often you get the best deal on any licensing when you buy the product initially. Um, 517 will tell you about some applications are built to run over networks and some of them aren't. I've had the pleasure of dealing with one of such applications. It was written, I think, in Visual Fox Pro and was not written to be used over a network initially. But some programmer decided to just kind of cobble it together and said, well, you know, you might be able to make it work. And it just so happened that this one particular medical office wanted to make it work. It was a nightmare. I can only give you one word of advice on that. If you're ever confronted with it, unless you really have a lot of time to waste on it, or the pay is really good, run. We ended up having to create ports that were mapped to TCP/IP in DOS programmed to recognize anything. It was not pretty. Medical offices, by the way, are notorious for that. They do not like to switch software, ever. And for good reason. They get used to it. Doctors, time is money. Money is time. So anytime that you interrupt any routines, people get a little grumpy. Accounting software, they're talking about different types of softwares that you're going to hit. Yeah, most of them are going to have something like QuickBooks or Peachtree, or, well, I don't know, I think Peachtree is still out there. I haven't heard of AccountEdge or Sage software, simply accounting, but I'm sure that there's probably about as many softwares for accounting as there probably are accounting firms. So, Intuit, by the way, it may not be now, but probably about 6 or 7 years back, their support was horrible. If you were trying to get on a business, setting up a QuickBooks server, and it was just took forever. Sales and contact. Exchange sometimes will be used for that. You'll also see a lot of people are now going to like Salesforce.com, an online web-based, cloud-based, if you will, customer relationship manager software, because then it integrates with their software like Microsoft Outlook and their email, and it does a lot of the hard work for them, up to and including data mining and looking at forecasting. There are other ones. Out there, but that's one of the most common ones now is Salesforce. People use Microsoft Outlook through Exchange. They use, I've seen people use Google to try and do it. You know, Google Apps. Not the most effective and efficient way, but it can be done. Customer relationship management can be as simple as just remembering your client's birthday and what day their bill is due, to follow-up contacts, notes about the sales interactions or the potential profit that you can get. Small business server, if you're going to go with the small, they did upgrade it to 75 users from 50. Everything is wizard-based, by the way, and it has a database, it has Exchange, it has shared calendars. It even has a version of SharePoint so that you can have your own internal websites, all in one. Whereas if I do it on an enterprise level, I have to have a server for each one, basically, or multiple servers. The other thing that a lot of companies will do, and you will come across, is like I was speaking of hosted or software as a service. You'll see the term like, or I've even seen all that is AAS as a service. It's kind of the new way of making a buzzword out of everything. Software as a service, infrastructure as a service, hardware as a service, virtualization as a service. There's even ice cream as a service. So basically, what that means is somebody else is providing that to you, Like hardware as a service is just a fancy way of saying leasing, but people don't like it when you point that out, unfortunately. But a lot of companies, it actually does make sense for them to go and get things hosted elsewhere rather than paying the infrastructure fees. For example, if a company needs a Windows server to run an application, you can probably get it hosted for a couple of $100s a month, depending on how long it's turned on, for someone like Rackspace, or Windows Azure, or Amazon Web Services. And some of those, like Rackspace, actually offer management of your software. So rather than have to pay the local guy $150 every time it comes out for 2 hours, they can pay and have somebody else do the work for them and make sure it's always up and running, not just waiting for an outage scenario. As for Linux, as a viable desktop alternative, you can get into arguments, and I've seen people almost come to fisticuffs over it. The fact is that you have to look at who your audience is, you have to look at who the support staff is, and you have to look at the local, shall we say, local talent pool. The first thing I always tell people, anytime you're setting up a small business, don't ever assume you will be there forever. Is it easy enough that the next guy can do it? Because small businesses especially like to change contractors or support people very quickly. If you miss a phone call, I've seen it where if you miss that one phone call, they'll pick up the phone book and start dialing somebody else. They don't even want to leave a message. So, the fact is that Linux, yeah, it can be run stable, but there's a lot of software that has to be looked at, because QuickBooks, you're not going to find a Linux version of QuickBooks floating around. And while there are frameworks that are in place in Linux to allow things to run Windows-based executables in some instances, it's still not a full replacement. And if you call up Intuit and say, yeah, I'm running QuickBooks 2013 on a Linux box, their first thing is going to be, yeah, we don't support that. So you have to look at that aspect as well.
You can run them like on a virtual machine.
You can, but then you still have to.
Just for that one program, like you had to have that program.
Yeah, but then you have to come up with the licensing for Windows. So you might as well have it loaded on there. I am partial. I like Linux, but in a business environment, I think it's easier to administer, and more precisely, more importantly, it's easier to find support for Windows-based desktops. That could change in a year. It could change in 10 years. It could never change. But usually, the first thing you'll hear from staff in a small business is, well, it doesn't look like my Windows did. My start button doesn't look the same. So there's always the training factor of the staff too. Because they're your user, they're your customer, and they're the people that if they don't like what you're doing, will tell their boss that they don't like what you're doing.
It depends how big the business is. If it's kind of small, I know if it was me, then I could get the stuff for free. You know, there's open office, and there's all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah, I'm actually a big proponent of open source.
yourself, it's just like,
I mean, I use open source software here at college all the time because there are some problems that I've come across that, I can't just whip out the checkbook for $13,000 for some custom piece of software when I can go to SourceForge or I can go to Google Code or I can go anywhere else and pick up a solution that worked for that one time for free, or even just a permanent solution. They talk about a lot of the basics of computing, making sure you have antivirus and anti-spyware. One thing to be particularly cognizant of is that a lot of companies will say, well, my nephew's dog's uncle's cat's neighbor uses AVG free on his home computer. Why can't I use AVG free in my business on all my computers? And it's because if you read real closely to the licensing, it says free for personal use only. And enough people think that if they ignore that and they just use it, that no harm, no foul. It's not quite the truth. TeamViewer, great piece of software, but if it thinks that you're coming from a commercially registered IP address, it'll come up and it'll say, and I like how they do it, but it'll come up and it'll say, we suspect that you're using this for commercial purposes. Please play fair. Some people don't, some people do. But a great example of the no harm, no foul mentality came when Best Buy's Geek Squad, they used to have a disc that they called the MRI disc. When you took your computer in there, did you really think that there was somebody back there that was actually paying attention to the problem and actually trying to fix the problem? No. They have a little disc that they download daily, burn about 10 copies of, lose about 5 of them. The other three of the other ones they use as frisbees, but that's aside the point. I know that from personal experience. And it's basically menu driven. You click this, you click that, you click this, you click that, you click this, and you're done. Well, they got in trouble because all of the tools they were using for virus removal, recovery, backup, everything else was all free for personal use. But when they realized, companies realized that Best Buy servers were reaching out, their IPs were reaching out and touching their update servers and everything hundreds of thousands of times a day, now I realized something was up. Can you afford the cost of litigation? Probably not. Cost of a settlement? Maybe. But it can get ugly. If a small business gets published in the news for having violated copyright and using software outside of licensing, you can pretty much be sure that that's going to be some of the worst publicity they can ever have, unless you've got a really good spin doctor on it. Same with antivirus, anti-spyware. In the same that you want to obey the licensing, you also want to make sure that you have that, because it's real easy to end up, for example, your small business server, if you don't put something on there to secure it, it's really easy for it to end up on a blacklist. That, oh gee, Bob's computer and accounting just got a virus and he just sent out 500,000 emails advertising gambling or advertising cheap pharmaceuticals from another country. And believe me when I say that if you're on a blacklist, it is not easy to get off of the blacklist. I haven't seen a lot of people use dial-up. Same with Telnet or SSH, unless they're technicians. Windows Remote Assistance, I really haven't seen a whole lot of people use that either. I've used it in a pinch if I really needed to get to somebody's computer, but a lot of organizations actually turn it off by default because of the potential security risks that, Jane back in procurement could say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, and invite her cousin Timmy's son to take control of her corporate computer from his machine, and next thing you know is he's got all the books. He's got all the procurement information. Bottom line, though, is secure it, because if you can't, most companies can ill afford to be on the front page of the newspaper, and it can happen. People may think, you know what, it's only going to be guys out of China that are trying to just get bots for their botnet. No, I've actually seen companies fight corporate espionage, corporate sabotage, and on a small business level, things can get very personal and very heated. I saw two computer companies, for example, in Portland, Oregon, get into a very nasty, bitter battle back and forth. Started off with just a couple of, Google reviews that were shills. They paid somebody to put them up, put negative reviews about each other up. And by the end, it was one of them had decided to pay a less than scrupulous individual from a Eastern Bloc country to go in and completely devastate the other computer company's servers, their email, and to completely destroy all of their customer records and take over their bank accounts. Got that all for the tidy sum of $250 too, by the way. As it came out in the court documents later.
And they paid the guy $250, and they got all that for $250.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah, because then he got into the other company's bank accounts, and he had as much money as he wanted out of them. They never caught that guy, but they did catch who paid him. But just because they caught them doesn't mean that it always gets caught. So, whenever you get emotions and egos involved, people get a little, how shall we say, touchy. We can go over the questions next week if you'd like. That gives you a little more time to read through some of that, through 11. If you guys are ready and willing to, we can actually get into chapter 12, which is wide area networks. Since I hear no objection.
No, go.
Huh?
No, go.
Okay. So, wide area networks. Is essentially, I have network A, and I have network B. And this, it connects them, is a wide area network. So let's say this one is in Phoenix, and this is in Washington, D.C. As far as the people here and here are concerned, they see no difference. You know, they can connect over it. The internet is actually a global area network, so to speak. For example, the World Wide Web. But when you get into WANs, you start getting into, for example, a bank, a large national bank. That would be a wide area network because you would have branch locations everywhere connected into that network. And it's not always just a single line or a single piece of copper or piece of fiber that goes from building A to building B. They use serial communications. For example, let's look at modems. We all do, okay. A modem is a modulator / demodulator. That's exactly what it stands for. All that does is it takes your signal, your sawtooth binary signal, converts it into a wave, an analog wave, back to analog or digital. So, modulator, demodulator. Input, output. Analog signals, by the way, most typically are represented by a sine wave. They can vary greatly. It really depends on the situation. What you will hear about too is CSU, DSU. Channel service unit and data service unit. It's usually one unit. It depends on which side you're connected into as to what part, the CSU or the DSU. Typically, you're going to see a CSU, DSU. It's going to have the line from the phone company into it, and then it's going to have a line out that goes to your router. These are usually in the form of a card. It looks like a big ISA card or a PCI card. Sits in a box, has the wires in. They turn it up, they do all the programming, and then there's usually a little jack at the bottom that you plug in. Or more precisely, you take another cable, run it to a 66 block, and then punch down and go to a patch down.
I feel like spinning in this chair. I want to do it. I want to do it.
Random. Okay.
Ooh. Okay, that was done. That was fun. I don't want to destroy this Computer. I like computers. Except I don't like that one.
So you've got four most common. Is going to be circuit switched, leased line, packet switched, and VPN. So we'll go a little more into that in terms of a circuit switched is nothing more than an on-demand, as the book would tell you. When you need it, it creates the path and you send your information over it. How should I say? A leased line is basically you have an open direct channel between your sites at all times. So it doesn't vary the route or the path. The path is generally set, point A, point B, and all points in between are registered and set, and they don't vary. When you get into what they call POTS, or plain old telephone service, that's actually a circuit switched. It can change, it can vary. It's basically whatever's open when you need it and how you need it. ISDN. They haven't put that in here, didn't they? I haven't seen an ISDN circuit rolled out as such as an ISDN. It was supposed to be the best thing in the world, and then DSL came out. So, ISDN, Integrated Services Digital Network, it actually consisted of 3 channels. So you had your 2 B channels and a D channel. 64 kbps, 16 kbps. So these were B channels. This is a D channel. The cool thing about ISDN at the time was I could pick up the phone and I could talk on it while I'm on the internet. I'm not going to lose my connection. It's going to go half as fast because the second you pick it up, this one becomes a phone line. But that's where the D channel came in, is that was the signaling. That handled the signaling for the phones and for the data so that it could take care of managing them. Because who here ever got bumped off the internet when, Aunt Josephine decides to call and you're in the middle of that 5 meg download that you've been waiting on for an hour and you're 4.75 megs and
That always sucks when I'm downloading a game.
It's funny because now file sizes are so much bigger, but transfers are so much bigger, but it's still the same. Fortunately, it's not the same because if somebody calls you, unless you have a unshielded or unfiltered DSL line, shouldn't discount. By the way, jumping back to modems real quick, they talk about V92. one of the features V92 on modems introduced was the ability to interrupt temporarily for, I think it was up to 5 minutes, your internet connection to have a quick phone call. And when you hang up, it was able to reconnect to that. Over in Europe, however, they got a speed bump with it as well. Not over here. We stayed at 56K. So basic rate interface. This is what also you call a basic rate interface, or BRI. Now, the other one that you will hear about out there is a PRI, which stands for Primary Rate Interface. A PRI actually consists of 23 channels plus 1 for management traffic. So it's 23 Bs and 1 D. You can imagine that's where a lot of people use for phones, because that can be either sent out for data and accumulated at 64 kbps per, or you have 23 phone lines. 23 phone lines works great for me. Add a couple, 2, 3 PRIs in and keep it, go analog to digital. You've got yourself a nice phone system. By the way, ISDN didn't really take off for home use and small office, home office really well, because at the time it was anywhere from $200 to $300 for an adapter alone. And then it was a pretty ungodly amount just to have the service. But if you had that absolute need, you had to have it. I actually set a few of them up. So, leased lines, we've talked about those. It's all dedicated. A lot of banks, financial institutions, medical facilities, they use leased lines because it is the one way they guarantee that when they need that 1.577 megabytes per second, that it's there. T-carriers. I'm sorry, it was 1.544, not 1.577. Bad me. Who here has heard of a T1 line?
I've heard of Tijuana.
Of course. T1, T3.
And Terminator 1 and Terminator 3.
Downloading some stuff sometimes will show those.
Yep.
Cable modem T1, T3.
And
It was a
that,
long time ago.
1.544 megabits per second. Is it 44 or 45? 44 megabits per second. So, what's faster?
You use it a lot faster off Napster with T3.
T3? or my Suddenlink 50 megabits per second. Which one is really faster? Exactly. These are dedicated bandwidth. That is your bandwidth. Nobody else's. Exactly.
It's like my precious. Yes.
Whereas
No.
this is actually shared bandwidth and it's a burst number. Basically, it says, yeah, we put a cap on there that you can use up to this, and if the conditions are right, you may get this, but chances are you're going to be a lot lower. I used to have that argument all the time with a friend of mine that my T1 at the office at 1.544 was faster than his 20 meg cable connection. And he used to argue with me all the time and say, no, my 20 meg is faster. On paper, yes. In reality, I can get a lot more done with that than I can with the cable modem that's always fluctuating speed. They also break down into a lot more channels, by the way, than a PRI line. Actually, I take that back. T1 is actually 24 64 bits, as opposed to 23 64 bits and 116 or 16 kilobit. So. That's how a T1 breaks out. They get used, they can be used for both phone and voice. A T1 can handle both at the same time, as opposed to one or the other. It does it by digitizing, it does it by time sharing. This won't be on the test, but this is the granddaddy of all of them. TDMA, which is a time division multiplexing, or multiplex access, I think. And that is what your old cell phones worked off of. And actually, pretty much everything now out there is a derivative somehow of TDMA. Most newer ones are all CDMA, which is code division multiplex access. Not going to be on any tests. It's a methodology in which you take data and break it up and have multiple channels on, or multiple conversations of either data and or voice on one channel. If you can get a T3, they're wonderful. By the way, TDM, they talk about it on page 540, time division multiplexing. You have fractional T1s as well. You don't always have to buy all 24. You may only need 8. That's a fractional T1. They're talking about multiplexing, demultiplexing. And that's basically taking 3 channels into 1 channel and then breaking it back out into 3 channels. So you've got 3 go in, 1 comes out, 1 goes in, 3 come out. It's much more handy to transmit everything over 1 wire as opposed to a single wire for every single channel. And it does that by doing time, where it transmits everything in a timed manner. So essentially, I don't think I want to say that it's milliseconds, and it's a timing frequency. It's a timing frequency that goes down that says that the frequency has to match. So then it says packet 1, packet 2, packet 3, and they don't override each other. Almost like a machine almost like a pitching machine with a big basket. You have data that goes in, that's the balls that are going into the machine, and then it spits them out constantly, but it's timed. And the Europeans, by the way, they do things differently. They can't just settle for 24, they have to have 30. So if you hear E1 or E3, it's actually an increased number of channels over what we would have. Sonnet, OC3s. Each one is 51.84 megabits per second. Sonnet is fiber, optical. If you're dealing with OC3s and that, or OC3072s, you're in a very big data center with a lot of data coming in and out. OC3 is the most common that you'll see, and that's packet switch networks. But they're very, very, very pricey. So you'll see ISPs, tier 1, or backbone ISPs. You'll see them use them. Packet switched is each frame is independent as it goes over the network. And that's where you have things like data flow. You also have buffers. You also have the reassembly of the packets on the other side. Because packet switched basically means out of the 3 packets that I sent, in theory, packet 1 could go to a server here, or a router here, a router here, a router here, to the destination. And packet 2 could go to here, to the destination, and packet 3 could just go to the destination. But they all get there. It's handled independently, and usually it's shared, and it may seem like it's like POTS or plain old telephone systems. It's not. It's all data networks that you're going over. It's not going over voice lines, analog lines. Virtual circuits is a version of that, though, in which you have point A, point B. There's no single wire, but it actually maps out the virtual circuit to go through, point 1, point 2, point 3 here to get to the destination. As far as you can tell, it's just like having a wire from one end to the other. A leased line is typically one end to the other physical line. Virtual circuits, you'll hear actually about that. If you ever get really deep into working with DSL. VCIs, virtual circuit identifiers. X25 is slow, but very, very, very robust. Meaning very few faults actually happen. It was one of the earliest wide area network protocols and the technologies, I should say. And a lot of ATMs will actually utilize X25 still. More often than not, you're not going to see it, though. Equipment is old, it's outdated, and there are better technologies out there. But especially in rural areas and places where perhaps the last mile phone service isn't the greatest, sometimes it's worth it to look into X25 because of the error correction and the error detection that it has. It's not, like I said, it's not fast at all. But if you're only transmitting small amounts of data, for example, an ATM, it's not transmitting the world. Or a credit card machine, it's transmitting very low levels of data. But they need to be accurate. Frame relay. It's pretty much digital fiber optic type networks. You hear that?
I don't know. It's not.
Never mind, I'm just losing it. It's a permanent virtual circuit, by the way. So it's set up permanently. The path never changes. And even though it is a switched circuit, it goes through once it's established, so that path never changes. It's not point to point. It can go point A, point B, point C, point D, but that path, once established, it won't change, so it's always going the same route. Whereas a switched virtual circuit may change routes. It'll all get to the same point, but if it's broken down and reestablished, it may have to change a direction, whereas a permanent virtual circuit will not change a direction unless they program it to. ATM can operate at 155 megabits per second max. I like how they put in here that there's a committed information rate. It's a nice way of saying a minimum rate guarantee. They say, kind of like Suddenlink would say, you have 50 megabits, but your actually CIR may only be 1.5 megabits per second. which means that as long as they're meeting 1.5 megabits per second on your internet connection, great. They are meeting their service level agreement. Which is why, not exactly the world's biggest cable company fan, but I do use them. If you look on page 543, you can actually see how that a lease line is laid out. So you have the local providers, and you have the leased lines that are going at T1 from point A to point B, which you get the full-time bandwidth on a T1. It's not shared, it's not variable, you get that. Frame relay is just as you see, you have points, you have 4 points there, and they can each have varied speeds, but it gets point A, point B, and typically you only pay for what you need, your bandwidth that you're actually using. ATM is also a fixed length system, which means that what you are broadcasting out over the network doesn't vary in size. The packets or the frames are always the same size. They actually call them cells in ATM. So once that's been defined, it will always be the same size. Even if there's less data, it will fill the buffer until it is the appropriate size. So even if it's 1 kilobit over or 1 bit over, that will generate another full cell. It's faster. It's more accurate because you can always tell. It knows that if it's waiting for a 6,800 byte packet or cell, and it gets a 6,500 byte cell, it knows something is wrong. And it can reject the cell and signal back. It's also based off of tuning of the wire and everything like that. As they say in the book, even voice data, video data, traffic that is really time sensitive is what you want to use that fixed length, because it can be switched, it can be used and moved a lot quicker and a lot easier than 1,500 here, 5,000 there, 2,800 there. MPLS lines are connection-oriented virtual circuits, is what it says, with labels assigned to each packet. Quite a number of companies have gone to MPLS because it's kind of a go-between. It's not purely layer 2 and it's not purely layer 3. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. You'll hear it called layer 2.5 because the labeling of the frames assists with layer 3, so it has enhanced layer 2 capabilities. I know quite a few financial organizations use it because they can get it cheaply, or when I say cheaply, I mean at a relatively decent cost. It's accurate, and it can handle the traffic, especially voice over IP. Voice over IP is a really big one that you will see implemented over MPLS because they're pure data. When I was installing them, we would install an MPLS line, and then we would install 4 analog lines into the back of the router, so that if the MPLS line went down, they had what they called remote site great, now my memory is really going to screw up on me. Basically, remote site survivability, so that if their data goes down, their VoIP goes down, that they can switch over and still have a few analog lines to be able to make calls in and out. That was just a backup, but VoIP is a very popular choice now. You can add or subtract channels as you need it for much more cheaply. I saw buildings I'd go into sometimes. I went into one small bank branch. Had about 7 phones that had a line each. When I went back to their telco room, started toning out and finding out what lines were live. Turns out they were paying for an additional 72 phone lines that nobody really knew about. They just knew they had a really big phone bill every month. So it's much easier to manage a voice over IP line from a central location. WAN over the internet. If you're not into paying for any one of the other leased lines, packet switch circuits, ATM, Sonnet, X25, you can set up VPNs. That's what a lot of places do. They'll do a site-to-site VPN, and they'll just use whatever they have. Suddenlink, Frontier, Quest, Comcast. And usually they're not using high availability type applications over that, but just basic communications between sites, file sharing, email. We do access with outside vendors through site-to-site VPN tunnels because it's a lot cheaper than setting up a leased line that's going to go from RPXIO data center to Hodgkins, Illinois. I don't know, random, just popped in my head. I know it's a town. It's easier to configure those as well because I can configure a VPN at a firewall level and just give them, I can actually say, hey, what IP address are you guys coming from? Does it change? No? Great. I put it in, and any traffic that comes from that IP address is considered to be on our network. So it's really easy, it's convenient, it's cheap, and that's why a lot of companies do it. So there's actually a great table on 12.1 that actually goes over the 4 basics: lease, packet, and circuit switch, and VPN. There may be items off this on the test. Equipment, you'll hear CPE, which is customer premise equipment. That's your, typically, you're going to be your router and your modem. Or a modem, and then whatever you put behind it. So if you just put a switch behind it, great. Chances are, though, your modem will be built into some sort of a router in a non-enterprise type setting. For example, our customer premise equipment is a Cisco router because they actually bring it in. Their equipment is a Juniper router that they bring their connection in, our provider, and then it connects up to ours, our customer premise equipment. And then whatever we do beyond that is our business. You'll hear DMARC. That's the point everywhere that their responsibility ends and yours begins. And I have seen tape put down to illustrate that point, because there was a 66 block that had a piece of tape here, a blue piece of tape, at the top and the bottom to show that the phone company was on this side and customer premise equipment was on this side, and they'd had a fight with the owner of the business who claimed that anything that came in, it didn't matter where on here, that it was their problem up until his router, even though his wiring was bad. Phone companies don't get into businesses or the building wiring. They don't like to, they don't want to, and they should. Because I've seen some of their wiring jobs. So usually you'll see things like extend the DMARC, which means that the phone company ran their lines in and punched them down. Now you have to run your lines off of that side, terminate it, and plug in. That being said, I think we are at the end of tonight. It's 10:00. So we'll pick up on page 548 next week. And we'll finish up this chapter, and I think we have one more chapter to go through. Troubleshooting the reports. You guys have a great week, and take care of yourselves.
You take care of yourself.
Oh,
Don't spend
I will.
I don't do it, but I have two office chairs in my office, and my cats like to use the other one. Just give them to guys. Just go on.
I've been waiting for this feature to be put out on our help desk software. Project management. Well, they're trying to, they do ISO, so.
What?
Nothing, I'm just laughing. You guys are the only people in this whole college that I used to smoke.
Coolness.
A long time ago.
I will never, ever smoke. Ever.
Cool.
After I watched a very, very, very dear friend of mine die of cancer, I never picked up. 2 packs a day, cold turkey. Never have looked back, never have said I want a cigarette or anything.
It's a pretty powerful motivation.
My grandma has lung cancer, and she has like something that affects her lungs, like CPD or whatever.
Yeah, chronic pulmonary bronchitis.
Yes, and because of her, I will not smoke.
Well, Tom was a really dear friend of mine, and he called me basically on his deathbed.
Aww.
You'll never touch him. Matter of fact, I can't even stand going to the casinos most of the time because of the smoke.
They say smoke from the cigarette actually kills you. Like secondhand smoke kills you more than.
Yeah, it definitely can. I mean, But oh, it was funny this last weekend. My wife picked up our first hunting rifle ever.
Oh, nice.
She's an ex-Canadian.
Oh, God.
And she's decided that she doesn't see the problem with having rifles as long as they're treated with the due respect and kept up, kept maintained, and kept away unless they're going to be used for something like target practice. Well, she picked this thing up. My dad, he's 74 with Alzheimer's, and just to give you an idea of how funny this was, is he couldn't remember the bacon and tomato sandwich he'd had for lunch less than 5 minutes earlier on Wednesday, but he remembered precisely what happened Saturday evening. She picks up the gun first, and I might add, she does have armed forces training. She washed out because of her knees, and it didn't show. So she picks up the rifle. It's a .22 featherweight, so it's really light, and she puts the shoulder rest up here.
Oh, my gosh.
And then it's down here. And it's like, no, I reach over and put it right there. Well, on her right side. And what does she do? She goes to the scope. She looks through with her left eye.
Oh, my God.
So my dad and I look at her. Maybe she's left eye dominant. It happens.
Mm-hmm.
Even though she's right-handed. So I said, okay, move it over and go like you're going to shoot with your left hand. So what does she do? She moves it over with her finger on the trigger, her right finger, over here, and starts looking through with her right eye.
Oh, my gosh.
Left side. By this point, my dad, who's been a gunsmith since he was 15 years old, I might add, 60 years, just looks at her and says, I've never seen anything like this. And so, I work with her, I get her corrected, and she's still trying to look through with the right eye. Well, let's try it again on the right side. Let's see. She goes back over to the right side, does the same thing with her left hand on. Then she looks through with her left eye. My dad, at this point, looks at her, he goes like this, he goes, ah! And he walks over to the door and bang! 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 And it was the funniest damn thing. She just the way, she's gotten a lot better now, but she'd never held a rifle ever before, never even touched one. Never touched a gun. So I called up her son to tell her, because now she